Hello all. Welcome to the first of the Centre for Pagan Studies interviews with our authors. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emlyn Price, Chairman of the Doreen Valiente Foundation and a Director of the Centre for Pagan Studies. It is my great pleasure to bring you a brief interview with our latest author, Yvonne Aburrow. Pagan since 1985 and a Wiccan since 1991, Yvonne holds an MA in Contemporary Religions and Spiritualities from Bath Spa University and is an accomplished author with 9 Wicker-related books and 2 books of poetry published, and is a contributing chapter author in 3 other works. We will be discussing the 2 second edition books that the CFPS are publishing this year with Yvonne, namely Dark Mirror, The Inner Work of Witchcraft, and The Knight's Journey, Witchcraft as Transformation. Welcome, Yvonne. Joining us from sunny Canada. She looks a lot more cool than I do in a 33-degree room here. Okay, basically this is a mini interview about a forthcoming second edition of the book that we're publishing. Yvonne, what was it that inspired you to write these second editions of your earlier works?
Well, having written the earlier work, I had written a number of extra articles, more or less in the same vein, including topics like what it means to be a priestess or a priest. Still haven't found a satisfactory gender-neutral word for either of those, but anyway, or gender-neutral version thereof. Some people say priestics. So yeah, I wanted to add that extra material in, and I've also learned more on the subject of anti-racism and gender and all that stuff. And I'd written some extra material on the inner work of ritual as well. And I thought it would be good to incorporate those into the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So would you say that these second editions supersede or complement the first editions?
I guess complement. I mean, there are some areas where, as I said, I've learned new things. And so you could say it supersedes it. But complement is probably a better word in that I've added the extra material, tidied up the formatting, and also gone through and taken some suggestions from our beta readers, or beta readers sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? Our pre-readers, yeah, to the book, and I think it's tightened it up, and obviously we have the lovely new cover with a photo by Doreen Valiente on it as well.
Yes, indeed.
Nice. Yeah.
So are these books aimed at a specific section of the pagan community, or are the concepts and the ideals expressed in them applicable to all sorts of individuals and groups?
So I think I'd like to say the whole of the pagan community. Obviously, if you don't like my ideas about being inclusive towards LGBT people and other marginalised groups, then these books are probably not for you. But other than that, you know, anybody who's kind of open-minded and willing to consider how their practice can be improved through engaging with the inner work. And it's not just for Wiccans or pagans, it's for witches in general, because I've also tried to include material from the fairy tradition, reclaiming, and traditional or folkloric witchcraft as well. So hopefully be of interest to those communities. I mean, I write as a Wiccan, so, you know, yes. I clearly see things through a Wiccan lens, so can't help that, sorry. But I think that by including this other material, we can learn from each other, and there's plenty of stuff in there that's applicable to all kinds of ritual. So it's about when you do a ritual action, whether that's calling a quarter or meditating or casting a circle, thinking about the inner processes that are happening when you do that thing. So one of the things I always say when you're calling a quarter is, okay, when you're saying the words to call the quarter, that's for the benefit of the other humans in the circle. The thing that you need to do to get the entity or energy to be present is actually to make a connection with it. So I always say to people, right, take a minute, stop being nervous about the words, because that's secondary. Just take a minute to kind of connect with the quarter, and then say the words when you've made that inner energetic connection. And hopefully that makes people feel more at ease, because people are quite often nervous about performance, but it's also doing the most important thing. So one of the things I like to do with my trainees is do a completely silent ritual, because then the words are completely set aside and it's all about the energies, and that can work pretty well. Because yeah, I mean, one of the kind of triggering incident that incited me to write the book, if you like, was that I went to a ritual with a bunch of people, and somebody called a quarter, and it was kind of almost like they were shouting at it, like, "Oi, you get here!" All right, and I was like, that, and I you know, no names, no patrial, obviously, but I was really uncomfortable with this sort of notion of shouting at the quarter, and I have seen it in various rituals, and I just thought, you know, somebody needs to propose a better way. And in fact, Frederick Lamont, who sadly died recently, put in his book 50 Years of Wicker, so that book is what, 20 years old now, he put in an excellent thing about, why don't we ask the quarters nicely to be in the circle? And I was like, right on, Fred, that's really good, you're right. So, you know, kind of credit to Fred for getting me thinking along those lines, really.
Yeah, that's brilliant. What would you you mentioned Fred, what were your main sort of influences in writing these books, Yvonne?
It's kind of hard to tease out, because I mean, clearly the books are distilled from my experience of running a coven and facilitating rituals. In terms of which writers have influenced my witchcraft, clearly Fred, and also I was fairly heavily influenced by Starhawk, and particularly liked her book Dreaming the Dark, which was, I think, the first book I ever read on witchcraft. And I mean, I haven't revisited it since, so I don't know, you know, might not like it as much now, because it's a bit, it might have been a bit second wave feminism, but anyway, it was very inspiring at the time. Also Teethorn Coyle, really like her stuff. And my brain's gone blank now. Christine Hofkramer, who blogged with me on Dowsing for Divinity, my blog. Yeah. And is Anderson Ferry tradition as well. I think for social justice ideas, I've learned a tremendous amount from Black and Indigenous people, usually quite often Black and Indigenous women. And in that regard, I'd like to mention Ghislaine Kinuani and Chelsea Vowell, who sadly you can't get Chelsea Vowell's book in the UK, but if you're in Canada or the US, I heartily recommend getting a hold of her book, Indigenous Rights, spelled W-R-I-T-E-S. It's very, very good. And I believe Ghislaine Kinuani has a book coming out as well, and her website is racereflections.co.uk. Good stuff. Yeah, I mean, a variety of sources, really. So, I mean, I've tried to write on the basis of my experience of the craft. And oh yeah, and I have to recommend the fantastic book Casting a Queer Circle, Non-Binary Witchcraft by System and I, which is well worth a read. And also Queer Paganism by Joe Green, both which are very good. And I've got a full list of queer pagan book recommendations up on the blog as well, for anyone who wants to follow that line of thought. So,
yes.
yeah, so a variety of influences, and I think, you know, I would hope that my writing was informed by my experience of practice too.
Yeah. Now, your the first editions of your books, what sort of changes have you seen as a result of those books? I know that when they were first coming out, the practice would have been slightly different to what it, I think, is nowadays, much for the better. So what sort of changes have you seen?
Well, I don't feel I can take credit for those changes. I mean,
No.
I think it helped that I stuck my head above the parapet, as it were, and said, hey guys, you know, we need to think about this issue. Because I think that prior to me sticking my head above that parapet, most covens were probably going, okay, this is a heterosexual coven and that's a gay coven, right? So if you wanted to practice queer mysteries, you went to a gay only or queer only coven. And if you wanted to go to a mixed coven, as it were, then it would be dominated by the heterosexual mysteries. And again, there were people doing inclusive stuff before All Acts of Love and Pleasure was published, most definitely. I mean, the first person to do same-sex initiations that I know of was Alan O'Flynn, and he did that in about 2004. So, and you know, there were other people, like I didn't come up with the inclusive version of the cakes and wine, the you know, as the athame is to the lover, so the cup is to the beloved. That was a group of Wiccans in Europe that came up with that. So, and there were lots of people who were already doing, say, invoking a male deity onto a female invokee, for example, or whatever, or you know, any gender on anything, or having the invoker be the same sex as the invokee. There were lots of people doing those things, but they weren't necessarily talking about them in public. And I think what the publication of All Acts did, and to a lesser extent Dark Mirror, was that it opened up the conversation. So suddenly there were people going, oh, there's this book which and it's advocating doing all these things together instead of having separate queer mysteries and separate heterosexual mysteries. And again, I wasn't the first person to write a book about queer paganism by any manner of means, but I think I can safely say that I am the first person to say, can we do both? And you know, as a bisexual, non-binary / genderqueer person myself, you know, if I went to a gay only or lesbian only coven, then the bit of me, you know, half of me is left behind. If I'm in a heterosexual only group, the other half of me gets left behind. And so it's like, right, can we? So in a way, I suppose you could say that inclusive Wicker is the bisexual mysteries in the, you know, and you know, let's face it, the great Doreen Valiente herself, without whom we would not be in this particular forum, said, all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. All acts of love, all of them, not half of them, you know, not just the socially acceptable ones. So, you know, I hats off to Doreen, eh? Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So how would you see your ideas in relation to the rest of the craft?
Well, yeah. So I think you could say that inclusive Wicker is in conversation with the rest of the craft, if you like. I don't want to set up inclusive Wicker as a separate tradition, and
No.
a number of people, particularly in the US, have said to me, well, you know, if you want to do something differently, go and form another tradition. Well, you know, I realise I'm sitting in Canada right now, but when we were having these conversations, I was sitting in the UK, and I said, well, that's not how we do it in the UK or Europe. What happens is somebody goes, oh, we need to do this tweak here or that tweak there. Why don't we have a conversation about that and see how we roll? And if you do that, if you make people move out of the main tradition and go and do something else, then not only do you lose members, but you get a whole bunch of different stuff that isn't allowed to talk to each other and can't attend each other's rituals. And you know, I think it's much better to have, you know, a much more broad expression of what Wicker is about.
Yes, of course.
Which I refer to initiatory Wicker. I think you can be too broad in the sense of, you know, some eclectic practices start to not resemble Wicker anymore, in which case why are they calling themselves Wicker? You know, but that when we're talking about initiatory Wicker, I don't refer to it as BTW because you know, it's not British anymore. BTW as in British traditional Wicker. Traditional witchcraft is used in the UK to refer to folkloric witchcraft of the clan of Tubal-Cain and related traditions variety. So it would be confusing if we called ourselves traditional Wicca. If it's in the US, it's not British anymore, guys. You're in the US now. So for God's sake, let's just call it initiatory Wicca. And even that term can be problematic because there are, I don't know, it's bound to exclude somebody. But unfortunately, when you try to create a catch-all term to describe something, you end up excluding somebody, and it's not intentional, it's just unfortunate. But we do sadly need catch-all terms from time to time.
Yes, yes.
And anyway, I think the main thing here is that, you know, inclusive Wicca is a tendency within initiatory Wicca. It is not a separate tradition. And I think one day people will forget that there was ever such a thing as a separate thing known as inclusive Wicca, and the practices that we practice will just be like kind of normal. Which is exactly what happened to progressive Wicca in the 90s, you know, like Tam Campbell, Karen Rainbird and David Rankin came up with this idea of progressive Wicca, which was much more egalitarian and open in many ways, in that it did a pre-initiation training course before people got initiated, and the rituals much more participatory. That was their key, those were some of their key points. And now everybody does it that way, and everybody's forgotten that it was them that came up with the idea. And you know, I suspect that's what's going to happen with inclusive Wicca, and to be honest, I'm okay with that. You know, little part of my ego would like a tradition named after me, but you know, I just shut up ego, bad ego. But yeah, I think it will just kind of become the norm. I mean, even over the last 5 years, it's interesting how there's been a shift from, you know, people thinking that that inclusive practice was somehow weird and fringe, and now it's kind of normal, and being exclusive is weird and fringe. So I think that process is happening. But I mean, obviously, I can't take credit for that. I think all the people who were already doing inclusive stuff, and all the people who picked up the inclusive ball and enthusiastically ran up the pitch with it are definitely co-conspirators in a very good way.
Okay. It's probably the final question really is, how do you incorporate the inclusive ideals into your own Wicker practice, and what feedback have you had from your members?
Yes, well, I think that's an interesting question, because I hope that I don't incorporate them so much as just do them. You know, I strive to make my practice as inclusive as possible. You know, there's always room for improvement, and I think we're all on this learning journey together and all that, but always try to think about the implications of what is in the ritual that we're about to do, and or that I'm writing, and try to work out how to make it inclusive. And obviously that inclusivity is for elderly people, people with visual impairments, people, LGBT people, people of colour, disabled people, and all the other things that could be excluded. I mean, one of the things is, you know, I'm left-handed, so I'm not a massively historically oppressed group or anything, but there have been people who would say, oh, you have to hold your athame with your right hand. No, I'm left-handed. I hold my athame with my left hand. You know, it's even small things like that. Yeah. I mean, as long as you don't accidentally clip somebody's ear with your thing when you're waving it about, which I have almost accidentally done once. It doesn't matter what hand you hold your thing is. It should be your dominant hand, the one that you direct energy with, right? So if that's your left hand, which it very much is for me, and that's the hand you hold it with. So it's about working with people, working with people's actual lived experience. You know, we bring our whole selves into the circle before the gods, and that includes our sexual orientation. It includes our physical variation, whether that be being, you know, so-called obese, which I am, or being disabled, or being left-handed, or being LGBT. All of those things are our true being before the gods, and we need to be able to bring that whole self into the circle and not have to pretend that we're something else to access that sacred space.
That's an excellent response. Yvonne, thank you very much indeed for sparing the time out of your pretty busy schedule, I know, to face up to and answer these questions. To our view, Yvonne, as always, it's been a pleasure to talk with you today. Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our interview today with our guest author, Yvonne Aburrow. I've had the pleasure of reading both of Yvonne's new works as they prepare to go to print, and I heartily recommend them. I should also, in the interest of transparency, mention I know Yvonne is an excellent high priestess, as I have trained with Yvonne. Thank you all for watching, and until the next time we meet, bye-bye and blessed be.